Hello, my name is JJ Sanchez and I'm the grant negotiator for Regions 12 and 15. Today I will be taking you through actions that you can take prior to completing the application, as well as required schedules that will need to be completed before you are able to access the 2022-2023 Special Education Consolidated Grant Application Federal. Once I have completed my portion of the training, my colleague Lori Marquardt will take you through the process of completing the 2022-2023 Special Education Consolidated Grant Application Federal. This presentation is being presented as a recording. However, you can still enter questions using the Q&A feature. Technical issues will be addressed through chat. We will monitor the questions to provide answers at the end of the presentation, and in some cases, if it is a simple or short answer, we will respond to you. Before we get started, please note that the information being presented is general information based on the agency's current understanding of the subject matter. It is subject to change. It does not constitute legal advice, and you are advised to seek your own legal counsel before acting on any information or guidance being presented. The agenda for today's training will touch on the following topics: preparations you should take before starting on your application, accessing eGrants, TIL login and eGrants roles, completing the SC 5003 Formula Grants Consolidated Schedule, completing the GS 2200 Application Designation and Certification, also known as the ADC. Then we will complete the application schedules as well as review updates to the 2022-2023 Special Education Consolidated Grant Application Federal, and also identify some grant resources that may assist you in completing these tasks. Here are some schedules along with important dates that need to be completed prior to completing the application. The application schedules will need to be completed in the order they are presented here. SC 5003 first, followed by the ADC. Once those are completed, you will have access to the grant application. Once planning amounts are calculated and become available, they will be posted on TEA's entitlements page. There is a document titled Important Dates for 2022-2023 on the TEA Grants Administration Grants Resources page under the training section. The document includes the same information for ESSA SPED State, Perkins 5 for LEAs, and Perkins 5 institutions. Next, we'll be looking at some steps you usually want to take prior to the application opening or as early as possible. Here are some preparations to take before the application is released. Update information in ASTED. LEA and campus information in ASTED should ideally be updated by early April. Verify staff has TIL and eGrants access ideally as early as possible between April and May. So if you haven't done so, we suggest doing it now. Coordinate with other staff members. Set up time and communicate with those who have information that will help you complete the application. Obtain a copy of the most recently approved 2021-2022 SPED application federal. Review the application and any negotiation items. Once the application has been reviewed, use it to help complete the 2022-2023 application. Coordinate and update eGrants contacts for SPED, ESSA, and Perkins. And as a reminder, please be sure to use Chrome as your internet browser. TEA's homepage can be very helpful. You can access TEA's homepage at tea.texas.gov. Several items that will be discussed in today's presentation are located at the top of the page in the Popular Applications ribbon, such as ASTED, Grants Opportunities, and TIL Login. Also, please be sure to take note of the Finance and Grants tab in the middle of the page. Hover over that tab and you'll be able to locate more information about grants and grants administration. Let's start by looking at ASTED. Once you have selected the ASTED link, it will take you to the ASTED, Texas Education Directory webpage. Once you're on this page, you can search for and review your district and campus information, or the person who has ASTED administrator rights can update the information. There's also a link for applying for ASTED administrator rights in order to be able to perform this task. The LEA's authorized official will approve any request for administrator login. Once you are in ASTED, you will want to check and update campus information, check and update campus grade span, and check and update other LEA information as well. Next, be sure all staff that need access to TIL and eGrants have access or get access as early as possible, and that new and existing staff have the correct roles for completing the application. By selecting the TIL login link on the Popular Application ribbon of the TEA's homepage, you'll be taken to the TEA login screen. On the TIL login screen, if you don't have a TIL account, click on the Request a User Account link above the username. You will be directed to a screen to provide information and submit your request. If you already have an account, this is a screen where you will log into TIL and access eGrants. If you have a new superintendent or designee who will be the grantee official certifying and submitting the application, work with them to get their access to TIL as early as possible. Program staff and or grant writers should know who the grantee official is, so once they have completed the information in the application, they can notify and follow up appropriately with the grantee official to be sure the application has been submitted to TEA in a timely manner. Clean up and delete old access. Maybe someone has been promoted or just has multiple roles for some reason. Review staff's roles periodically and delete roles that are no longer applicable to a person's position and duties. If you are requesting access through TIL, there are several applications you can choose from. You will need to request eGrants access. eGrants roles and privileges. This table shows you specifically the eGrants roles in blue on the left that have different capabilities based on different areas, tabs of eGrants in black along top. For example, in the Context tab of eGrants, all roles except Grantee Viewer can modify information. Another example, if you are in the Special Collections tab working on the SE 5003, only a grantee official or grantee manager can submit changes. Once you are working on the grant application in the Grants tab, only the grantee official can submit the original application. If you need assistance in identifying the proper role, contact the TEA grant negotiator assigned to your region. We will provide more information on how to contact a negotiator when we get to the Grant Resources section. When requesting access to eGrants, the correct CDN and vendor ID number will be needed. The vendor ID number must be a 10-digit number. For LEAs, it will usually begin with a 1 followed by the LEA's Federal Employment ID number. For a few charter schools operated by a university, the ID number will usually begin with a 3 followed by the LEA's Federal Employment ID number. The same 10-digit vendor ID number is also used to access ER for payment requests. Start early and coordinate with others who will aid in completing the SPED application federal. Collaborate with ESSA and Perkins staff members who also have a stake in completing the contact information on SE 5003. More on this in a moment. Work with business office staff to be sure items budgeted in the application are properly coded. For example, knowing your LEA's capitalization level is key for properly budgeting supplies and capital outlay. Knowing your LEA's capitalization level may help to avoid amendments later in the year. Work with those involved with the needs assessment and property document activities in the grant application. Fiscal agents begin communicating and setting up agreements with member districts. If you need a list of your SSA members, access your current SPED application, and on BS 6001, there's a button that will produce a report of your current SSA members. Finally, consider processes specific to your LEA. Is there anyone else you need to coordinate with? Start early and set up time with them too. You will also want to obtain a copy of the most recently approved copy of the 2122 SPED application federal. We often see information in the application that is very similar, if not copied from the previous year, as many LEAs use the funds in the same way from year to year. Be sure to use the most recently approved application so you can hopefully avoid negotiating the same items again this year as last year. Review the negotiation notes and based upon those notes, improve the information included in this year's 22-23 SPED application federal. This should reduce negotiation time and help everyone receive their awards more quickly. Updating your eGrants contacts. You do not need to wait until the grant application is launched by TEA to update the contacts information in eGrants. This tab is available to update at any time. Remember, this is not just for SPED. Information in the Contacts tab includes ESSA and Perkins contacts. Be sure to include the grantee official who will be certifying and submitting the SE 5003, the ADC, and grant applications. Also, the primary and secondary contacts for your SPED application, as well as others who may submit negotiating responses for the original grant and/or amendments. If you need to add, edit, or remove a contact, you can do so by clicking the Contacts tab at the top left of the page. Once clicked, you will see the Add, Edit, and Remove buttons at the bottom of the screen. Once you have clicked the Add button, you will be prompted to enter the new contact's information. The SE 5003 is a consolidated schedule that contains the guidelines and assurances for SPED Federal, SPED State, ESSA, and Perkins. We will talk about completing the SE 5003 over the next couple of slides. In order to access the SE 5003, you will need to log into TIL. Once you are logged into TIL, you will find a list of applications such as eGrants, SPED reports, expenditure reporting, and GFFC reports. In the eGrants application section, select the eGrants role that will permit you to work on the SPED federal application. For example, ESC staff may have grantee viewer role and grantee manager role. The viewer role will only allow you to look at contacts lists, but the grantee manager role will permit you to edit the contact information. Once in eGrants, enter your county district number in the box located on the top right corner of the screen. The SC in SC 5003 stands for Special Collections. Therefore, you will find SC 5003 under the Special Collections tab. Select the SC 5003 Formula Grants Consolidated Schedule link from the list and start reviewing the information and make updates as appropriate. When completing the SC 5003, all three grant programs, SPED, ESSA, and Perkins, will need to include any barriers to equitable access and participation for groups receiving services. Be sure to allow the ESSA and Perkins grant program staff to complete this section before it is certified and submitted. It is acceptable to select no barriers. All three grant programs, SPED, ESSA, and Perkins, will need to review the general guidelines, provisions and assurances, lobbying and certification, and program-specific guidelines and provisions and assurances. Once all the program staff for SPED, ESSA, and Perkins have completed and reviewed parts 1 and 2, the authorized official will need to certify and submit SC 5003. Complete the information in the authorized official section by selecting the appropriate person under Select Contact. The submitted information will be completed by the system once the Certify and Submit button is selected. The next item you will need to complete is the ADC. You will log in through TEAL and select the eGrants role that permits you to complete the ADC. Once in eGrants, enter your CDN as described previously for the SC 5003. This time you will select the Grants tab to find the 22-23 SPED Grant Federal. Under the SPED Grant, there will be a list and you can select the SPED application, designation, and certification form. In Part 1 Designation, select the radio button for how you apply for each funding source. Apply on own as an independent, apply as a fiscal agent of a shared services arrangement, not apply at all, or apply as a member of a shared service arrangement. As you can see, this year we have added a line for the IDEA B Formula ARP and a line for IDEA B Preschool ARP. It is also very important to identify if you will not be applying for a source of funds for that program at all. If you're not eligible or do not have any funds for a specific program or funding source, that line will be disabled and grayed out. In Part 2, the authorized official should review the certification and incorporation statement. Then complete the information in the authorized official section by selecting the appropriate name under Select Contact, and then select the Certify and Submit button to send it to EA. The submitted information will automatically populate once the Certify and Submit button has been selected. This completes my portion of the presentation. I will now turn the presentation over to my colleague, Lori Marquardt, who will walk you through completing the application schedules.
Thank you for the introduction, JJ. As he mentioned, my name is Lori Marquardt, and I will be going over the next steps in the application process. After the applicant designation certification form has been submitted, the application will appear and will have a status of available. Clicking on the grant title will open the table of contents page. Schedules to complete. The table of contents page shows all of the schedules that must be completed. Please start with the GS 2100 Applicant Information Schedule. We are now transitioning from the DUNS number to the UEI number. This is located on the GS 2100 Applicant Information Schedule. As of April 1, 2022, the DUNS number was replaced by the UEI number, or Unique Entity Identifier. If you have not applied for your UEI number, please go to sam.gov and follow the instructions. The GS 2100 schedule displays the applicant information, including primary and secondary contacts for the grant. Because these individuals will be the first point of contact, if negotiation is required, please ensure their contact is accurate and up to date. Next, we will go to the PS 3502 schedule for private nonprofit school participation. Part 1 of the schedule shows the schedule completion exceptions for the PS 3502 schedule. If the grantee is an open enrollment charter school, or if there are no private schools, including homeschools, located within the legal boundaries of the applicant's agency, the grantee will check one of the two applicable options and will be done with the PS 3502 schedule. Otherwise, the grantee must complete the remainder of the schedule. Let's jump to Part 4, Proportionate Share Calculations. Part 4, Proportionate Share Calculations. Please note that line 2 should be greater than line 3. Line 2 equals students ages 3 through 21 in public schools on the last Friday in October 2021. Line 3 equals students ages 3 through 21 in private schools on the last Friday in October 2021. Part A was for Idea B formula, and now in Part B we will be looking at the proportionate share calculations for Idea B preschool funds. Line 2 should be greater than or equal to line 3. The system will provide an error message if line 3 is greater than line 2. Line 2 equals students aged 3 to 5 in public schools on the last Friday in October 2021. Line 3 equals students aged 3 to 5 in private schools on the last Friday in October 2021. Let's look at Part 6, Services. In this section, the grantee must describe how they determine which private school students receive services. The grantee must provide a brief description of the consultation process. For example, the grantee can state that they met with the private schools and determined that speech services were the greatest need because of their consultation process. They serve private school students that need speech services. Part 7, Consultation Process Documentation. The application accepts multiple responses to allow for all three options. Documentation of the attempts made to obtain written affirmation must be attached if the second checkbox is selected. The documentation should be a description of the attempts the LEA made to obtain written affirmation from private school representatives that timely and meaningful consultation occurred. We have a private school consultation template. If you do not have a copy of this template, please contact your regional negotiator to request a copy. On the next slide, I will go over how to attach the documentation in eGrants. Attaching documentation in eGrants. Step 1. Click on Attach Files next to the green paperclip icon. This is located below the grant title in the Table of Contents page. This will open the Attach File page. Please follow the instructions provided to attach the file. Make sure the file is saved to your computer before attempting to upload the document. We have gone over the program schedules for the application. Now we will be moving on to the budget schedules. In this upcoming section, we will be covering the program budget summary, supporting budget schedules, fiscal compliance, and some helpful resources that are available to you. The BS 6001 schedule is the program budget summary. There are 5 fund sources on the federal application: Idea B formula, Idea B preschool, and Idea B discretionary DEF. When carryover is available for Idea B formula and preschool ARP, the columns for these fund sources will be opened. Part 1 shows the available funding for each fund source, and Part 2 is a detailed breakdown of how those funds will be used for the grant. Just like previous years, CEIS funds are no longer documented in the budget summary. CEIS will only be documented in the BS 6016 schedule. I will be covering this in more detail when I cover the BS 6016 schedule. Please note that as you enter information in Part 2 of the budget summary, those budgeted funds will auto-populate in the application's supporting budget schedule, and you will need to complete the supporting budget schedule. Also, as a reminder, direct administrative costs are not allowable with Idea B funds. This is why the direct administrative cost is hidden in the budget summary. Let's move on to the supporting budget schedules. When available, the Idea B formula and preschool ARP carryover will populate into Part 1, Available Funding. This will be on line 4 under the Idea B formula ARP column and Idea B preschool ARP column. The BS 6101 supporting budget schedule is for payroll costs. Part 1 of the schedule is pre-populated from the BS 6001 program budget summary for each funding source. If funds are not budgeted in the budget summary for the fund sources, then the column will be grayed out in Part 2. The number of positions is not required in this schedule. Instead, these are check boxes. This will give more flexibility with amendments. Be sure to select the checkboxes under the appropriate fund source for the types of positions that you are budgeting for in Part 2. Let's move on to Part 3 of the schedule. Part 3 of the BS 6101 covers substitutes, extra duty, and benefits. Be sure to select the appropriate checkboxes as applicable. Line 1 of the school-wide checkbox was one of the most negotiated items in last year's application. To give you some background on this, Section 1114A1 states that for school-wide programs, LEAs may consolidate with other federal, state, and local funds. This is why the school-wide checkbox is an option in this schedule. By selecting the school-wide checkbox in Part 3, the grantee is indicating that they are consolidating federal or federal, state, and local funds on the ESSA SC 5000 schedule. Additionally, the grantee is indicating that the budgeted funds will be used to pay for personnel who provide services on school-wide campuses not coded 8911. There is a validation we had added to the system that will pop up if you select the school-wide checkbox. We added this alert in the system because we noticed that several grantees selected this checkbox without seeing if they had indicated they were consolidating funds in the SC 5000, and the application had to go back into negotiation, either for the grantee to unselect the school-wide checkbox or for the grantee to revise the SC 5000 form in their ESSA application to indicate consolidation of funds. In the next slide, I will go over the SC 5000 schedule as it relates to the school-wide checkbox. School-wide costs for payroll and the ESSA SC 5000 schedule. If the school-wide checkbox is selected in Part 3 of the BS 6101, then the SC 5000 should indicate one or more campuses designated as school-wide and consolidation of funds. This consolidation of funds is indicated by selecting either federal funds only or federal, state, and local funds on the SC 5000 in the ESSA application. The image above is an example of what the SC 5000 would look like if the grantee decided to select the school-wide checkbox in Part 3. As a final reminder about Part 3, please note that this section is for positions not selected in Part 2. We just wanted to remind you about the supporting budget schedule instructions. This is a great resource available to grantees as they are completing the schedules in eGrants. There is an instruction button located on the top right-hand corner of every budget schedule. If you click on it, it opens a new page that provides additional information that helps you complete the schedule. The next budget schedule we will be discussing is the BS 6201, Professional and Contracted Services Schedule. You will notice that there are 3 parts to the schedule, which we will discuss in detail. We are going to skip around a bit with the schedule. First, let's take a look at Part 2, Direct Administrative Costs. Direct administrative costs are unallowable in this grant, so we will not do anything with Part 2. This is true for the entire SPED application. So anytime you see direct administrative costs, you may ignore it. Now let's look at Part 1 of the schedule. If funds for professional and contracted services were budgeted back in the program budget summary, those funds are now pre-populated in Part 1 in both total professional and contracted services costs line and the remaining 6,200 costs that do not require specific approval. So what if the district needs to budget for specific costs? There are 2 ways to budget for specific costs in the schedule. In Part 1, Line 1, there is space to enter costs for rental or lease of building space for building or land. If the district budget funds in line 1, the remaining 6,200 line will automatically be reduced. The second way to budget for specific costs is in line 2, professional and consulting services. Again, if funds are budgeted in line 2, remaining 6,200 will be reduced. If funds are budgeted in line 2, professional and consulting services, then there must be itemized funds in Part 3 of this schedule. So let's move into Part 3 of professional and contracted services to budget itemized specific services. Notice that many of the specific costs have grayed out boxes. This indicates that the cost is unallowable for the grant program. You may also review our detailed program guidelines that identify allowable professional and contracted services for guidance on allowable activities. You may find the program guidelines through the link provided or through TEA's website under Grant Opportunities. If the district has allowable itemized costs, please document the cost using the dollar amount in lines 1 through 27. Note that the district is required to budget for residential set-aside. You may enter the dollar amount in line 22 for those costs. If the specific cost is not listed in Part 3 of lines 1 through 27, you may scroll down to line 28 and add an allowable cost and provide the purpose. But please double check that the cost is allowable per the program guidelines. Districts may add or remove additional itemized services as needed by clicking on the Add Item or Delete Item buttons. Once all itemized professional and consulting services have been budgeted in Part 3, save the schedule. In the background, the system will validate the amount budgeted in the line Total Professional and Consulting Services with the cost in the dollar amount budgeted in Part 1, line 2, Professional and Consulting Services. If these amounts do not match, an error message will populate. The district will then need to follow the error notification in order to correct the schedule. Here is the budget schedule for BS 6401, Other Operating Costs. Again, if funds for other operating costs were budgeted in the BS 6001 Program Budget Summary, those funds are now pre-populated into Part 1 in the line remaining 6,400 costs that do not require specific approval. The district may itemize specific costs in lines 1 through 7 for costs that require specific approval. Again, all e-grants follow the same rule. If a specific activity is grayed out, this indicates that the cost is unallowable for the grant program. Once all allowable costs are entered in lines 1 through 7, funds will automatically be deducted from the amount in remaining 6,400 costs that do not require specific approval. Budgeting for specific costs requires at least 2 steps. First, the district budgets for the specific cost. Then you will see that each itemized cost has a unique instruction listed under it, identifying the steps to take next. For example, if the district budgets funds in line 1 for out-of-state travel, follow the instructions, LEA may keep documentation locally. This means that the district will follow the link in the PowerPoint to the TEA website to the forms for prior approval, disclosure, and justification. They are under the Justification of Expenditure section. Click on Justification for out-of-state travel. Complete the form and keep it on file for your audit records. Note that other operating costs may have different required actions, such as submitting prior approval forms. Most of the forms are now maintained or will be in the future in a secure automated online system called Edgar Forms Work App System. This new automated system will track the submission, review, and approval of forms and should expedite the entire process. As mentioned in the previous section, we will not do anything with direct administrative costs since they are unallowable with this grant program. Next, we will discuss the Debt Services Schedule, BS 6501. This is not a frequently used schedule, but may be helpful for your district to cover lease purchases spanning multiple years. Examples of allowable debt services are SPED-adapted buses and portable buildings for unique SPED instruction. Please refer to the program guidelines as they break down specific allowable costs within the consolidated grant. Let's look at Part 1 of the debt services schedule. Line 1 is where you budget the current school year capital lease principal. Line 2 is capital lease interest, which is not allowable with this grant. Line 3 is capital lease debt. This is where you enter debt services for each fund source. This completes Part 1. In Part 2, enter the property description using allowable activities such as adapted bus or portable buildings for unique SPED instruction. Then select the fund source from the drop-down option, such as Idea B Formula or Idea B Preschool. Then enter the property value. As mentioned earlier, the lease must span multiple years. So at a minimum, the contract must be 2 years but cannot exceed 10 years. If the district is budgeting for multiple debt services, you may add additional items using the blue buttons at the bottom of the schedule, and if needed, the district may also remove the debt services by clicking the delete button. Now let's move on to the next schedule, capital outlay. BS 6601, Capital Outlay Schedule. If funds were budgeted for capital outlay in the Program Budget Summary, BS 6001, they will be pre-populated in line 3 and the total capital outlay cost line. But before we go into detail about the budget schedule, let's discuss capitalization levels, since this is a frequently negotiated item. Per Edgar guidelines, items must be capitalized if they cost $5,000 or more, or they meet the district's capitalization level, whatever amount is less. Equipment is capitalized if it is non-expendable, tangible, personal property with a useful life of 1 year or more and meets or exceeds the capitalization level. So for example, let's look at a wheelchair that costs $4,500 in a district that has a capitalization level of $5,000. The wheelchair would be budgeted under supplies and materials as it does not meet the capitalization level of $5,000 even though it has a useful life of over 1 year. Now that we have discussed when items are capitalized, let's look at 3 ways to itemize costs within the capital outlay schedule. Again, if funds were budgeted for capital outlay in the Program Budget Summary, BS 6001, funds will automatically be pre-populated in Part 1, Line 3 for furniture, equipment, vehicles, or software costs in the total capital outlay cost line. Therefore, if the district budgeted items in lines 1 and 2, line 3 will automatically be reduced. Line 1 is for budgeting SPED-related library books or media controlled by the library. Line 2 is for costs to upgrade or improve equipment purchased through the previous year's SPED funding. Line 3 functions a little bit differently, as the district must itemize these costs in Part 2 of the schedule, and the cost of these items must equal the amount budgeted in line 3. So in Part 2, if funds are budgeted in Part 1, line 3, these costs must be itemized in Part 2. Examples include SPED-related furniture, equipment, vehicles, or software costs. In this section, please enter description, number of units, the fund source, and a brief generic description related to the SPED program. For example, use adapted bus to transport SPED students instead of just bus. Please double check to ensure that the costs listed in Part 2 are equal to the amount budgeted in Part 1, line 3, and the district may add or remove items using the blue buttons at the bottom of the schedule. Next, we are going to talk about the BS 6016 Fiscal Compliance Requirements Schedule. As a reminder, every eGrant schedule has an instructions button located in the upper right-hand corner of the page. This can be very helpful. Now we will work through the schedule line by line. Let's start with line 1. In line 1, you will enter the amount of state and local or local only special education expenditures from the most recent prior year that the LEA was in MOE compliance. This information may be found on the most recent IDEA B MOE Compliance Review Report. Now let's move to line 2. In line 2, enter the state and local or local only special education funds budgeted for the current year. Let's break this down a bit. If the district enters state and local expenditures in line 1, then the district must enter state and local expenditures in line 2. This schedule does not record the district's federal funds, only state and local or local funds expended. Line 1 is for the most recent prior year special education expenditures, and line 2 is for the current year's state and local or local only special education budget. Now that we have reviewed what information is required, let's look at the results of completing these two amounts. So, if line 2 is less than line 1, the justification will automatically open line 3. Otherwise, line 3 will not open and you will not need to complete it. If line 2 is greater than or equal to line 1, the district will move down to line 4. In line 4, the district will select one of the options. Either the district has used state and local or local only expenditures to complete sections 1 and 2. Let's go into greater detail in line 3. If the LEA's budget does not equal or exceed the amount expended in the most recent year, the district must select a specific justification from the options. Then on the right-hand side of line 3, document the amount of MOE reduction. The amount entered in line 2 plus the amount entered into the MOE reduction in line 3 must equal or exceed line 1. Part B is for MOE voluntary reduction. Here the district must select one option, and if you are a fiscal agent of an SSA, you must complete this section for each member district. To determine which option to select, compare the district's current year planning amount and final amount to the prior year's final amount to determine if the district is eligible for MOE voluntary reduction. The district must meet all three requirements in order to voluntarily reduce MOE. The three qualifications are: 1, must have an increase in IDEA B formula final amount from the previous year. 2, must have a determinations that meets requirements. And 3, has not been identified as having significant disproportionality under 34 CFR section 300.647. The third option on the schedule provides the district with the opportunity to voluntarily reduce MOE for 22-23. If this option is selected, the district must then complete the MOE voluntary reduction amount for the actual amount of MOE being decreased in the current year. If the district does not have an actual amount when submitting the schedule, they can report an estimate, and then when final amounts are available, they can amend and revise it to the actual amount. Another option, if the district is undecided on whether or not to voluntarily reduce MOE, they can wait until final amounts are available and select option 1 or 2 until then. Then if they decide to voluntarily reduce MOE, they can amend the application and add the amount. Now we will move on to Part 2 of the BS 6016 Fiscal Compliance Requirements Schedule. Part 2 CEIS and CCEIS Requirements. I will refer to both as CEIS. The districts will only complete this section if funds are being reserved for CEIS. Otherwise, leave sections Part 2A and B blank. CEIS provides support for kindergarten through grade 12 students who have not been identified as needing special education services, but who have additional academic or behavioral support needs. Reserve funds may be used for professional development, educational and behavioral evaluation services, and supports to these students. LEAs that are identified with significant disproportionality are required to reserve the full 15% of IDEA-B formula and IDEA-B preschool funds in the schedule. If you are required to or decide to reserve funds for struggling non-disabled students in Part A, first select your district name from the drop-down list. The second box in Part A will reflect the maximum allowable reservation. Then you enter the amount the district will reserve up to 15% in either IDEA-B formula and/or IDEA-B preschool. If you are a fiscal agent of an SSA, you may add additional districts by clicking on the Add Member District. This is the only space where the district will document that they have reserved funds for struggling non-disabled students. Remember, CEIS no longer can be allocated in other budget schedules. If the district decides to remove CEIS funds, then the district will need to delete the member district information in Part 2, Sections A and B. The district should not remove the CEIS funds if they are reserving funds due to significant disproportionality that year. In Part 2, the last column labeled Carryover is new. LEAs that are identified with significant disproportionality are required to reserve the full 15% in a particular year of their choosing. If they did not expend the full 15% for their CCEIS activities in the allocation year, they may continue those activities the following year if they have sufficient carryover funds to meet the requirement. This is a way for the LEA to let us know they're carrying over CCEIS funds and intend to expend them in the following grant year. They would select the Yes button. If they select No, they are not carrying over CCEIS funds. NA is auto-populated if CCEIS funds are not reserved. And now we will be going over some various resources that are helpful when completing the Special Ed Consolidated Grant Application Federal. Virtual LEA Application Trainings. ESSA Consolidated was June 7th from 9 to 11. SPED Federal Consolidated is June 16th from 9 to 10:30. And Perkins 5 is June 16th from 1:30 to 3. In-person LEA application trainings. ESC Region 4. ESSA Consolidated was June 1st from 9 to 11:30. SPED Federal Consolidated was June 1st from 1 to 2. And Perkins 5 was June 1st from 2:30 to 3:30. In-person LEA application trainings at ESC Region 13. ESSA Consolidated is June 24th from 9 to 11:30. SPED Federal Consolidated is June 24th from 1 to 2, and Perkins 5 is June 24th from 2:30 to 3:30. Here is our contact information for Grants Administration Division. If your district has questions regarding the application or other applications, they can contact their regional negotiator. Remember, check the website for updates to the contacts page. We also have general contact information for the Grants Administration Division. Additionally, this training will be posted to our website to review later. This slide provides links to helpful guidance on the Special Education Consolidated Grant. Our Grant Opportunities page lists applications available. You can search for your grants and look up due dates, entitlements, program guidelines, and other important information to manage grants. The Applying for a Grant link provides umbrella guidance on how to apply for grants and what to expect during the grant cycle. The eGrants link provides access to all electronic grants, such as special education, ESSA, and Perkins. The eGrants link works best with Google Chrome. It is no longer supported under Internet Explorer. Here we have the Special Education Entitlement link, which breaks down the grant award for each district. These are updated when final amounts are calculated, which is usually around December. They contain entitlements for special education, ESSA, Perkins, and others. Next is the IDEA Fiscal Compliance link. This link will assist you with MOE and excess cost questions. Then we have a link to our justification forms that are needed for costs budgeted in the BS 6401, other operating costs such as out-of-state travel like we discussed earlier. Now we will go back live to open it up for questions from our audience.